Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Well, it marks 1 month since the government of Alberta arrested and imprisoned Pastor James Coates. For what crime was he arrested? Well, no crime, actually. Yet he has been in the maximum security facility of the Edmonton Remand Center for a full month, which I should tell you is a punishment that even violent criminals seldom face. Before the pandemic, 400 violent criminals from that maximum security facility were released, lest they catch the bug. But Pastor Coates was put in there. And I had the opportunity to meet Pastor Coates' wife 10 days ago, and she tells me she has not had a single visit with him in his month in prison. And she's not even allowed to make Zoom calls with him. She has to go to a government facility when they can arrange it to chat with him briefly by voice calls. I have never heard of a prisoner treated this way, even when I visited Tommy Robinson in the most secure prison in the United Kingdom, HMP Belmarsh, similar to Guantanamo Bay. He was allowed 2 visits from his wife a week, even though he was in the special handling unit at that terrorism facility. Pastor James Coates has done a month of very hard time, and for what? For not closing his church. Well, the good news is today, after 1 month in prison, the government of Alberta has decided to drop all but 1 charges against him. That 1 charge is a health infraction, like a traffic ticket, really. And Pastor Coates should be out in a matter of days. Joining us now via Skype from Calgary is the head of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, John Carpay, the public interest law firm that has been defending Pastor Coates. John, great to see you. Congratulations on this change. I know it's a day of happiness for Pastor Coates and his family and his congregation, but for me it's a day of fury that he has been in there for a month and that the various charges against him were dropped so casually by the satanic prosecutor. I say that because putting a pastor in prison while releasing violent criminals, that's right out of the Bible. That's who would you want to free, Barabbas or Jesus? That's right down to what that is. And for a month, that prosecutor thought, oh, let's keep him in. So I'm not particularly impressed that after a month, she says, okay, maybe I got it wrong. But you tell us the facts.
Well, I'm really grateful to have a superb legal team. It was Leighton Gray and James Kitchen and Jay Cameron who did outstanding work. We were in negotiations with the Crown for several days back and forth. And of course, the government is loath to do a 180-degree turn and, suddenly drop everything. We, on our end, of course, we were not going to agree to, the bail condition that was keeping Pastor Coates in jail, which is that he would agree to have his charter rights and freedoms violated by unscientific and unconstitutional health orders. He was not willing to agree to that, and so he was in jail. Now, this time being released, there is not this condition that he agreed to have his charter rights and freedoms violated by unconstitutional health orders. So therefore, his release is going to be possible by as early as Friday, March the 19th.
Now, I want to ask you, why does it even take 2 extra days? If the prosecution says, all right, fine, forget about the last month, let's just pretend we haven't had a pastor in prison for a month. If they've come to that agreement with you, does it need to be sanctioned by a judge? Is that the delay? Your agreement with the prosecutor has to be stamped by some court?
That's correct. There's going to be a joint Crown and Defense submission to accept a guilty plea to failure to abide by an undertaking, which, by the way, it was an undertaking that was imposed on Pastor Coates. He never agreed to it at any time, but apparently police can impose undertakings on people and then charge you for violating them. So there'll be a joint Crown Defense submission that Pastor Coates pay a $100 fine in respect of that criminal charge of not complying with an undertaking. But the good news is this is going to trial May 3rd, because there's one of the charges of breaching the Public Health Act is going to trial May 3rd to May 5th. And the onus will be on the government to prove that the violations of our charter freedoms are justified. And the government's not going to be able to operate just by news conferences and fear-mongering. Government's going to actually have to produce evidence in court to show demonstrably that these lockdowns were necessary, that they're beneficial, that they're working, that they're effective. And most significantly, the government is going to have to prove that the lockdowns are doing more good than harm. And I think the government's going to have a tough case to prove in court.
John, you sound optimistic. You sound hopeful. You're looking forward to that event. I understand all that. I'm still not over the last month. And I want to ask you this. Is it the same prosecutor, Karen Thorsrud, who made the deal with you, that put the pastor in prison to begin with a month ago? And by the way, this was the pastor, you and I spoke about this the other day, that was obviously so embarrassed by what she was doing, she asked the judge to not put her name on the prosecution. She was so ashamed of her own misconduct. Is it that same disgraceful prosecutor, Karen Thorsrud?
No, I believe that the Justice Center lawyers were, I read the letters back and forth, and it was a different individual that we were dealing with. It was not Karen Thorsrud. But I do find it rather despicable that she would ask to have her name removed, especially when it was previously publicized. Her name was not removed when she was before the Justice of the Peace arguing to keep Pastor Coates in jail. So, but it wasn't her.
Well, I suppose I'm glad to hear it. I mean, the idea of a secret prosecutor who hides from the world while throwing pastors in jail is just too gross. I mean, even the Star Chamber in medieval London had lawyers mandatory, not lawyers secret. So gross. I think that Pastor Coates, by pretty much any definition, would be a political prisoner. I say again, what he's charged with, you mentioned a $100 ticket. I've had parking tickets of almost $100. I don't know if there are even any speeding tickets under $100. Those are, I'm not going to call them trivial matters, but they're non-criminal matters. And the idea that you would be in jail for a parking ticket is unthinkable in Canada, yet it happened for a month. I have a theory, and I know it's only speculation, but I've seen the last two public opinion polls in Alberta, both of which put the United Conservative Party in second place. In fact, the latest by Leger pollsters has the NDP at 51% and the United Conservative Party at 30%. I'm not sure if that poll is reliable, but Leger is, they've been around a while. I think that there is an anger in the province at these lockdown extremists and the way they're being so punitive against pastors, against restaurant owners. I know the case of Pastor Coates has been reported literally around the world. Do you think that there was a political decision to change course? I mean, how can you hold the line against a pastor for a month and then suddenly say, oh, okay, pay $100 and you're out?
I know that the Justice Center lawyers were in negotiations with the Crown, and it was somebody other than Karen Thorsrud. It's just pure speculation as to how independently or not was the Crown Prosecutor's Office operating, and frankly, for purposes of the rule of law, and to not have repeats of the SNC Lavalin situation, there is something to be said for elected politicians not being involved in decisions to prosecute or not prosecute, or what kinds of agreements are entered into. Now, that said, I think at the end of the day that, unless you or I have got, special access to conversations that we were not privy to, I mean, we'll probably never know whether there was any influence there or not. But certainly on the face of it, we were just dealing with the Crown, and you kind of have to, take it for granted that the Crown is acting independently as it should be.
Yeah, you know what? I suppose you could say, well, the law is the law, but a law that's promulgated by unelected, unaccountable public health officers who are not judges, who are not even police, and who have tyrannical powers to throw someone in prison, that is inherently political. And the idea of a prosecutor saying, in my professional discretion, under the aegis of the Justice Department, I say put that man in prison for 2 months till his trial, that's inherently political, especially when down the road, Costco, Walmart have thousands of people filing through every day. I don't know, I just find the whole thing political. And although of all the 10 premiers, Jason Kenney, I think, is the closest to being a conservative and the closest to being a Christian, the treatment of Pastor James Coates was unique in Canada, and I dare say unique in the free world. I am unaware of any Christian pastor or priest anywhere in the Western world who has been imprisoned for opening his church. I simply have not heard, and I follow the news fairly closely. I bet you do too, John. If
it's unique, it's unique in the world.
It's a unique disgrace.
And you mentioned the political aspect of it. I can't help but ask, why were the restaurant owners in Alberta, not a huge number, at least one, the owner of Whistle Stop in Mirror, Alberta, but apparently 2 or 3 others, there were restaurant owners who said, we are staying open, we're defying these unconstitutional health orders, issue as many tickets as you want, but we're going to stay open. And those people did not end up in jail, and yet Pastor Coates did end up in jail. And Jason Kenney delights in telling Albertans that the restrictions here are less onerous than in other provinces, and as far as I know, that's probably true. But that's no excuse for having unconstitutional health orders that hugely violate our human dignity and our human rights and our basic freedoms, like being able to associate with whomever you want, when you want, where you want, how you want, in person, not having the chief medical officer tell you that you can only enjoy relationships by way of a 2-dimensional computer screen. These are severe restrictions on our charter rights and freedoms, even in Alberta, and there's no way that Pastor Coates should ever have been put into jail. The condition that was imposed upon him, that he actually make an express commitment to abide by unconstitutional health orders that violate his charter freedoms, that's unusual, because usually the condition for bail release is be of good behavior and keep the peace. It's a very boilerplate clause, that you agree to be of good behavior and keep the peace, and that's it. And yet the government here sought to impose this condition on Pastor Coates that he agree ahead of time to abide by unscientific and unconstitutional health orders.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.